Today is June 4th, 2023. My name is Kevin, and I'm with the Houston Asian American Archive. I'm talking today with Mr. Jarek Alagarbes. He is a Filipino American musician who is one of the co-founders of Houston-based indie rock slash pop band Paper Gliders. So thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So, to start off, I'd like to ask a few questions about your early life. So you were born in the Philippines, but I read somewhere that you grew up in Manila. So what was it like growing up in Manila in the Philippines?
Um, well, my life in the Philippines was basically mostly in Manila. I grew up in I was born in the Dagupan city, which is like a province for me. So it's more like, like suburb type area with a lot of mountains and farmlands. And Manila's a little bit more different. It's more like, like a metro city. So I get to see a lot of like buildings and I get to be in proximity of a lot more people than usual. It's more condensed and more things to do, I would say. So I mean, I had fun growing up there.
And was there kind of like I mean, I know you immigrated to the US when you were 12, but were you involved with the music scene at all in the Philippines?
Oh, actually, actually, I was 14 when I
14.
yeah,
Sorry.
but yeah, no, so I grew up, doing a lot of activities. I mostly like play with my friends, play basketball, uh, do a lot of extracurricular activities in school. But at home, that's when I was like trained to become a classic, pianist. And I've done that for at least 2 to 3 years. And I wasn't really feeling it with the piano. Like that's not really the instrument that I wanted to play because around that time I was also like serving in church, either as an acolyte or as a part of a choir. So I was more inclined to like singing and being in a group. But later on, I definitely changed my instrument to guitar when my dad introduced me to an acoustic guitar. That's when I started playing guitar later on.
So your dad introduced you to guitar. So were your parents, so did you come from kind of like a musical family? Did your parents were they really involved with music?
Um, Not really. My dad was a doctor, and my mom was she works at a telephone company. So it's just basically the matter of like impressing maybe like neighbors or other family, other relatives, just by saying, "Hey, my son grew up and learned how to play piano. He was classically trained." Because I know here in America it's pretty much the same thing with like Asian families when you have like parents are basically kind of like telling you, "Hey, you need to learn how to play piano. You have to be good at it." And then you grow up and then they're like, why are you picking up piano right now? I need you to become a doctor. you know so it's kind of like it's just a little bit of confusion growing up. But yeah, um like I said, like piano is basically something that I learned not because I liked it. It's mostly like because my parents pushed me to. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think a lot of, Asian American kids or Asian kids can relate to this idea of your parents introducing you to some form of classical training like growing up. So growing up, what kind of music did you listen to then? What were some of your favorite bands or music groups?
Mm. So in the Philippines, there's this genre called, not really a genre, but it's like a mix of genre, called OPM, which means original Pinoy music. Pinoy is like other word for Filipino. It's basically like our K-pop. So when people say, "Hey, I listen to OPM," they already know that's Filipino. It could be different things. I usually liked a lot of what do you call it? Like singer-songwriter type of stuff where like they can just sing into like a synth
Hmm.
and later on, when I became like a little bit more of a teenager, that's when I became a little bit more rebellious. When I started listening to rock music, you know, even like classical rock, like, you know, Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses, and even like all those like Filipino bands like Orange and Lemons, Join the Club, and Hale. Yeah, so like it just changes. It's just changed when I grew up, and I'm more inclined to like listening to rock music now.
Hmm. Um, so, you know, in when you were in the Philippines, did you have a band or did you play with people? Did you write music at all?
um, Not really. It's mostly when I was in high school in the Philippines, because I did go to high school there when I was 12. So I went to high school for 2 years, and during those 2 years, I picked up, you know, guitar, because I always see like my classmates um in a hallway, like playing their guitars, and they usually play covers and they try to impress some girls, you know. So I kind of just try to do the same thing. And you know, I get to meet other people too, like who like to play guitar, and you know, that's when we kind of just like, hey, we should jam here, we should jam this song, you know. I want to see if it would sound as good as those artists playing on the radio or something. So yeah, that's when I started picking up guitar actually.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I think in the bio, you wrote somewhere online, you were drawn to like Filipino rock and folk music. So
Mhm.
can you tell us a bit about the sound of Filipino rock and folk music and how it is similar to or is different from Western rock music?
So I would start with folk. There's this thing where like because you know, Filipinos were Philippines was a colony of the United States after the Spanish American War, between 1900s to 1950s, right? Um, that's where we started picking up anything American pop culture. So I would say it's kind of mix of like Spanish and American type of music, because I know here in US they had something similar to Spanish folk that Filipino Americans picked up. So in the Philippines, whatever we heard on the radio, we tried to like imitate, right? That's also like, you know, starting after World War II. So the folk music that a lot of people are familiar around the world was this song called Anak by Freddie Aguilar. So this one was released in 56, 57 countries, I believe. And it's basically a song about a kid who grew up and started being dysfunctional. Like he started becoming like ungrateful towards his parents. So it's kind of like this story of like a Filipino family story that became a little bit sour as he grew up, because he started doing different things, started becoming rebellious. So it's kind of like in a perspective of a parent who just basically cared too much about the kid, and basically, you know, not it didn't go so well. So, you know, I can relate to that, definitely. But yeah, so the folk music that you hear even nowadays, with modern Filipino folk and modern American folk, definitely have similarities to them.
Hmm. I'd like to go back to, I guess, kind of your parents. So, did your parents have any aspirations for you in terms of what they wanted you to be or do when you grew up?
Yeah, like I said, my dad was a doctor, and when I was a kid, actually, I had a hobby, specific hobby of like drawing bones, like a skeletal system, and it turns out I was very good at it. And weirdly enough, I also like to draw maps, which I was also very good at.
Hmm.
And my dad uh, started noticing that, hey, maybe he could be a doctor just like me, you know. But I turned more into like the art aspect of it. So as I started, as I grow up, I picked up more into like art. and I started doing visual art. I started painting. I started doing graphic design, and even the guitar and with the music and stuff. So they like their aspiration definitely like they didn't push it on me, but also like their expectation is pretty different. So they kind of got a little, I would say, frustrated, but ultimately they let me do my own thing anyway.
So now on to immigration. So you mentioned that you immigrated to the States when you were 14. So did you experience any culture shock here? And was the US everything you expected it to be like?
Um, this can be long, if that's okay. Well, probably
Oh,
not,
no
but
worries. Yeah, yeah.
so when I was a kid, we watch a lot of American movies, of course. The one that I remember specifically was Stuart Little, which is it's a pretty good movie. Um, but like the environment of that is basically just American family living like in a close quarters type of a house. They do family stuff, but like also like they have this also like family problems that I never really encountered as a kid. Um, Also like just the portion of food, of course, is also different because if you go to Asian countries, the portion of the food is basically a lot smaller. What else? Yeah, the transportation, like everybody's like uh riding taxis or like having like good expensive cars, and then in the Philippines you can just uh raise your hand and like ask for like a tricycle. So it's like the tricycle is like the three-wheeled uh cab with a motorcycle attached to it. So those are like the two wheels, and then the other one, like the attachment next to it, is like another wheel next to it. So it's kind of like smaller, but also like very convenient when you like don't have a car and you get to go around the town, and basically they can take you anywhere. It's kind of like Uber or Lyft here. It's just all different. Um, yeah, so I had a lot of expectations when I came here in America. Um, I was I was hoping for more snow because I remember like in the movies, like during winter, oh, of course, there's gonna be a lot of snow. Everything looks white, right? Everything's cold. I've never experienced cold in my life unless I go to like uh places on top of mountains. So we have that in the Philippines. But that's basically what, like 60s Fahrenheit, the coldest. So it's not really the cold that I wanted to to experience. Um but yeah, when I came here in America, the first thing that I experienced was when we bought a big bucket of fried chicken from KFC. And I remember arriving here late at night, and my aunt picked us up, me and my mom and two of my brothers, to go to their place. But on the way to their place, we had to stop by and get some dinner. So we picked up a bucket of fried chicken from KFC, but it turns out the store was closing, so they gave us two more buckets of fried chicken for free. And I remember looking at those fried chickens; they're like this big, like the thigh was like this big. And I was remembering like looking at it, and I was like, this looks like a whole chicken from the Philippines, like one thigh. It's like significantly bigger than what I was used to. Like I said, portion size never disappointed. It's definitely more than back in the Philippines. The next thing I remember was we go into this place near well, I mean, in my aunt's neighborhood, and I just realized how spacious everything is. The streets, every house has a lawn, which is something that I kind of like didn't expect. I was like, oh, I thought it's kind of like the big city, like they all just like have houses next to each other, blah 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 blah. But then like I went there, I was like everything was spacious, and I was like, why does everybody have like a lawn here? Like why do they have grass everywhere? you know, I wasn't definitely used to that. And then yeah, I came uh later on when I started getting used to like what the neighborhood looked like. The thing that I missed the most coming here after coming here in America was just the proximity of everything. So in the Philippines, you have neighborhoods where like people you can just see people outside having fun, right? Either day drinking or like playing chess or going to the store. Because in the Philippines, like some houses there, they can convert some of their garages into stores. So whatever you need, you basically can get like a few steps in. You know what I'm saying? And then here in US, you have to like ride your car just to go to a store. That's the thing. So it's like the proximity and then like just how people are like not so trusting uh with each other. Like people can give you like a stink eye just thinking, hey, this kid looks different, you know. Or hey, I don't know this guy. He's probably not from the neighborhood. So it's definitely that different. Nothing that I would expect coming here. So I had to learn how to adjust to that for months.
Um, so did you come to the US with your parents too, or did you just stay with your aunt?
Oh, so my dad came here a year prior
Okay.
uh, uh, of us basically arriving here because he got a job here in Houston, and we had to follow him because you know there's pretty much nothing else over there. He still has a business there, but you know he doesn't really need anybody else from his immediate family, from us, to take care of it. He has like people to take care of his business over there. Um, when we arrived here, is basically him already trying to set up like a living arrangement for us. So he basically purchased a home, but at the meantime, while we were just starting to get acclimated with everything over there, we had to stay at my aunt's, which basically was like this big mansion down at Jersey Village. That's I'm also wasn't wasn't used to. But yeah, we eventually got a house after that. So yeah, my dad came here first, and then my mom, me, and two of my brothers followed.
I see. And when you came to the US, you talked a lot about this, like the difference in culture, but um, and you kind of also talk about how, having a different appearance, you noticed that that could maybe raise some eyebrows or get people to like notice you. Um, so did you ever face any, I guess, outright discrimination due to your background when you first came here? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Um, I would say the first time I experienced racism was when I was in high school. When I went to high school here, it's like a week after I started high school here. But you know, there's already a diversity in our school. Uh, when I arrived, and I remember seeing a lot of people who are basically just trying to be in cliques, right? So it's kind of like an American movie still. The only difference was you just have to like insert yourself sometimes or not at all. So you have to get in, just try to stay from somebody else's way, or else you get something from them. You know, that type of deal. Yeah. I would say the first time I experienced racism was basically from a classmate when I just well I they probably noticed it because I can when I came to America I can already speak English, but the accent was something that I didn't have, the American accent or the no accent American. So they they noticed that I definitely spoke different type of English than they're used to. So they try to discriminate based on that. And of course, they had to find out what type of Asian are you, you know, what kind of Asian are you? Why does your last name sound Mexican? You know, so they tend to ask this type of questions because they don't know, but also they kind of like just trying to like make me feel like I'm just different from them, you know. So it's either I don't fit with Latinos, I don't fit with Asians, or I try to be somewhere in the middle, and then they still try to push me one way or another anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to hear that, like you had to face those experiences, and it's just disappointing that racism and like discrimination is like, just occurs just like that in the US. Um, so I'd like to talk more about, I guess, your musical experiences. Um, so tell me about this Asians meme page that you met Vaughn on, and um, how you guys connected and what your initial opinions of him were.
Okay. So prior to graduating high school, um, I was basically someone who basically enjoyed memes, early on. It's like, a typical millennial trying to find ways to waste time and cope with something. So memes were basically like our language back then. Even the earliest memes that you find would be something about either um, being angry at something, or uh, I would say something that not even like learning about what other people would look like if they do something like activities. And also, well, now that I think about it, it also has something to do with like race. So when I joined Asians page back in 2010, I basically just looking for something that's basically something that I relate to, because I'm, I want to feel like, oh, I'm Asian. I want to look at memes and I want to laugh at something that, or feel good at something that, basically makes sense to me, or something I can relate to. So when I joined that meme page, I never knew anybody personally who joined that page as well. It's just basically like a community of people that submit memes, and we basically look at them and just comment on it and say, oh, this is so relatable, oh, this is so funny, oh, that's like a really smart joke, like dad jokes, stuff like that. Um so um yeah, I started joining that group, and then I started looking into basically becoming an admin. Admin is basically the one that curates all these memes, like how a curator does artworks at a museum. So basically, an admin of that page is basically like a meme curator, if you if you want to have that term, coined. Um, that's when I met Vaughn, but I never met him as like someone who basically I would be friends with. I just met him in hopes of becoming an admin of that page, because he was already an admin of that page at that time. So I try to be more involved in that page. Just try to like comment on people's memes, and try to discuss, have a little bit of discourse here and there. And he just started to take notice, and we started talking like online. We're just like, hey dude, when I joined my Asians page as an admin, I was like, yeah, I definitely would love that, so I became an admin, and we started talking more, because we started noticing that like we have a lot of similarities when it comes to like memes and how it relates to us. um that's when he added me on Facebook. So now I have this chance of knowing him more like personally, right? And this is the funny thing. Um, I never knew that he was from Houston when we started becoming like friends on Facebook. So one day he just posted on Facebook that he was looking for bandmates to, start a band on his own. And I didn't really think any of it, like, if it's going to be like something that I want to be into, because I was going in school for graphic design, for arts. So I was a graphic designer when I met Juan. I was trying to learn from it, and also I was doing visual arts. I was also a painter. um but I wanted like a different avenue to like get into when it regards to like art. And music is something that I never thought I would be into growing up, because I just stopped doing music when I got here back in 2006, right? So I never thought I would pick it up like 4 years later, so jokingly I said, "Hey, can I join your band?" I was like, "Yeah, where do you live?" I was like, "I live in Houston." And I was like, "Oh, I also live in Houston. Where at?" "Dude, I'm like 3 miles away from you." So that was kind of a shock. So that's when we kind of like I just met him, like, and I was like, "Hey, we could meet in person, maybe we could try something." So I was like, "Yeah, sure, I need to buy a guitar," and like blah blah blah. And then uh I did audition, by the way, uh when he asked, you know, I did audition. I sent him a video of me playing Dust in the Wind. I don't know if you know that song. But the thing was, when I was playing, I had the guitar at the back of my head, just trying to be more like, try to be cool about it, because I was just like basically just joking, "Hey, can I play? Can I join your band?" So I was just like, yeah. But yeah, we eventually kind of just talked, and it was like, "Hey, I do want to start a band for real. And I want you to be, I want you to be a bandmate, and I want you to join me because I already have songs." That's what he said to me. "I already have songs written, and I want you to like finish it with me." So yeah, that's basically how it happened. Like when I met Vaughn, we are already like it came from memes, and then it started getting more serious, like getting to the music territory, if you will.
Was this band that he was trying to find members for? That was the Big Sexy Time? Is that what it was called at the
Oh
time?
yes. Did he tell you about the origin of that?
I mean, he told me about how you guys got together, but I don't think he told me about the origin of that
Oh,
name specifically. Yeah.
uh, I don't know if I should say it, but I'll check with him. But I can tell you right now. I think it's usually like, how like Asian parents get to be like very witty when they watch something on TV. And this is basically based on what he told us, like me and my bandmates. So the Big Sexy Time is basically his dad watching uh Miss Universe. So he calls that show the Big Sexy Time. He's like, "Hey Vaughn, this is the Big Sexy Time right here." Yeah, so that's when we called our band the Big Sexy Time. And that eventually evolved to, Paper Gliders.
Got it. Um, so do you remember, like, I guess the first gig or show you did with you know with Vaughn and the rest of the band?
So we have I think we have three transitions when it comes to like becoming like this final six-piece band. We started with two guys with just their acoustic guitars, right? And we that at that time we didn't know anybody. We probably know somebody who does the same thing, who did the same thing as us, basically just performing open mics and going to tea shops, coffee shops. So I would say like one of the very first gigs that we had was at Ben's Beans downtown, which was this coffee shop that opened back in 2011 and later closed at like 4 years later, like 2015. But we were regulars there. We were playing like every Monday. Also, some like local tea houses in Houston. Um, so it's basically very small. Like we just wanted to be out there playing our stuff. Wanted people to hear our stuff, the things that we created, and it's just basically just a small thing that we kind of just that makes us feel good, because we get to play our stuff. We get to release those type of music, like two Asian dudes just being their guitars and then just like trying to vibe with the rest of the crowd. So I definitely love that. The next one was later on we did get a drummer. Um, his name is Ryan, and we started becoming a three-piece band. And another one who's basically someone that we just kind of want to be with us. His name is Josh. So he was our bassist, our very first bassist, and also that's when we transitioned from the Big Sexy Time to Paper Gliders. And one of the most memorable shows that we had was when we played at Warehouse Live. That was back in 2013, I believe. Um, we had a huge crowd. We haven't played at that type of venue where a lot of people get to go and see us play. So it's a little bit more nerve-wracking, and I was a little bit more nervous. But performing live was something that I kind of just try to deal with because I do have anxiety problems. So I try to give it like 100% every single time. I just have to be focused more and like have to be more uh with the rhythm. So basically that's something that experience was basically something that kind of just told me that, hey, it's going to be bigger from here. You're going to have to learn how to deal with this every single time. So that's pretty much what happened, right? The very last transition was when we stopped playing music for a couple of years. I believe like from 2014 to 2016, we started looking at our own stuff where we kind of just like, hey, can we do this music thing again? Let's do it one more try, right? Let's give it one more try. And we eventually did. We started making music again. This time we tried to do it right. So we started picking up more members, and we ended up with a six-piece band where we basically have this more creative freedom of like uh letting them know, hey, we need parts from this one, we need parts from this one. Can you make sure that you can put your own thing creatively in this certain song? So when we started developing those type of songs where it just sounds like a really full band, songs, and then we started playing live, I think the very first one that uh made me think that, hey, this is actually it. This is the band that I envisioned or we envisioned like years ago, was when we played in at White Oak Music Hall back in 2018. Because that one we had like a room full of like almost 200 people, and they're just looking at us. They don't know who we are. And then when we started playing, we hear those shouts of people and they're saying, "Woo, Paper Gliders!" Because like we're kind of just shocked. It was like, oh, holy, like there's a lot of people here. Like we're never used to this. So just imagine being that dude with like an acoustic guitar at an open mic, and then later on playing at a show at a room for like 200, 300 people. So it's just basically something that just made me think, hey, this is it. This is music right here. This is what I want. This is what I want for my life right now. Yeah.
Hmm. So you're the lead guitarist for Paper Gliders, but you've also done some percussion work and synth work. So can you tell me more about your songwriting process in the band, as a multi-instrumentalist?
Oh, it definitely like my experience with other instruments, with synth is basically straightforward. I was classically trained in piano, so I retained some, but not all, not all of those lessons that I learned as a kid. So I still know how to play piano. Theory wise, I'm not really that good anymore. I would like to become more versed in theory, but with just like other musicians probably out there doing the same thing. For me, I'm more into like learning by ear. So learning by ear is something like, hey, I know what this sounds like. I kind of want to emulate it, but not the way people would look at music. Like I would look at it like, I hear it, I can imitate it, and I can do this. And that's basically how I've done a lot of things. So we have the song that's like 5 minutes long, and then somewhere towards the end, I was like playing like a little type of like riff, and I didn't even know it's kind of just like a Japanese type of a scale that I was playing. Nobody pointed that out to me until I made it, and I was like, I just heard it in my head, you know. So there are things like that, mostly in like our composing process, like music creative process. Um, the difference right now is basically we have 6 people, and Vaughn and another member of ours, Abby, they're more into theory. So that balanced things out. So if I do create something that I didn't know it sounded bad or good, they would point that out to me, and I'd be like, okay, I could work with this. Yeah, so we have that balance of like somebody looking at it outside the box and someone from the inside the box, and that creates like this ecosystem of like understanding of how the music works, basically. Yeah.
And when you're writing, coming up with new music, do you ever have any like creative slumps? And do you have any strategies for how you get over them?
Creative slumps. I would say I do actually sometimes. So the process that we have with making songs was mostly Vaughn creating his guitar part. And he mostly go from like, a little bit of melodic but like rhythmic part of it. And then that's where I come in with the lead. So lead usually sometimes I do struggle with finding root notes. And that root notes would be something like, because we do use jazz chords as well. And jazz was something that like I'm still trying to get into. I know some basic jazz chords, but also like we try to be more complementary when Vaughn and I play. So there's kind of like counter melody going on with our songs. Sometimes it wouldn't sound good if we just like try to do basic jazz chords. So we try to be a little bit more complicated, more intricate with our stuff, just so it would lock in with the sound. So there's no like bad sound coming out when we play together. What happens is what happened was or what happened during me not getting the right sound is it would be Vaughn trying to assist me on finding that right note or right chord, and Abby as well, the female member of the band, she would also assist me in helping out sometimes. And in return, when they do have problems with harmonizing, because well, not only me, like some of the members, like even Vaughn, I think we were in choirs, we were kids, so we were kind of used to like this melodic, like a harmonic type of like singing. um but they do struggle sometimes, and I get to help them with those. So it's kind of like a back and forth type of like helping out, which is good, especially in a six piece band where it's kind of just like, hey, we don't want to get stuck with something while we create a song. Maybe we should just help each other out, whatever we're strong at, which suits us. Like if you're good with melody, then help us with melody. If you're good with like composing the chords, then yeah, does help us doing the chords. So definitely a lot of that going on in our ecosystem right now.
Thanks for sharing that. What is the favorite song that you have contributed to writing in this band so far, if you have one?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna tell you the story about like this particular song that we composed. I would say like around 2017, 2018, and we did play that live for the first time when we played at White Oak back in 2018. It's this song called Little Leaguers, which is it has some similarities to what Bohemian Rhapsody sounded like. That's why I like it so much, because it started out as like a kind of like a dare, I would say, because Vaughn, like I said, he's the one who creates initially like how the skeleton of the song would sound like, right? So he would create like rhythmic riffs here and there, and then he would show me. It was like, hey Jake, want to listen to this? This is something I created like a week ago, blah blah. And he created this one riff, and I was listening to it. I was like, oh, that sounds good. And then later on, he like probably like a few weeks later, he was like, "Hey Jerry, I made this new riff. Can you listen to it?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah, sure." So he showed me, and then I remembered that one riff that he played a couple weeks earlier, and I was like, "Hey, you know what sounded what would probably sound good? Maybe we should combine those two together, those two riffs. Maybe we could do something with it." And that became like a song that sounds so Rhapsody-ish, because when Von and I played that skeleton, that final skeleton in front of our bandmates, and they were like, "Holy crap," you know, when they try to feel what we felt when we created that skeleton. Henry, one of the leading vocalists of that band, he started putting his own piano parts, and then Adrian, as a drummer, he started doing his own thing with the drums, and I, along with the skeleton, I also created some of the bass parts of that one, which also like was adapted when we had the new bassist, and it just basically sounded like the way I wanted it to sound, and also something that he wanted it to sound. So we kind of have this understanding, like, hey, this song needs to be like Bohemian Rhapsody, but a little bit more progressive and more indie. Like, please let this happen, right? So we started playing that in shows, and I was like, every time we play, I just felt that like this is it. Like, this is our magnum opus. Like, this is how good we could sound if we create similar songs. This could be like our Bohemian Rhapsody. This could be like our meal ticket, kind of thing. But we haven't released it yet. Hopefully soon. We're still trying to play with it a little bit. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully we can release it soon, so people can see how good that song was. Yeah, that's definitely my favorite, I would say.
Paper Gliders is a pretty large band. You're a six-piece. Can you talk about some of the challenges of working in a band so big? You touched a little bit on this, how you kind of it's complementary, right? You help them, they help you. But are there any challenges? And then what are also some of the advantages besides this complementary kind of relationship?
Um, there's definitely ego at play. I wouldn't say, but it's mostly not about music, or it used to be not about music. It's more about like the way we want the band to go, like direction wise. We had that a little bit last year, where we kind of just got into a stalemate where like we don't want to do this certain thing, and I hope you understand, but like I just don't want to be like, somewhere where we have to do certain things. I kind of just don't want to get into the detail of that, but it's basically mostly like in the business side, I would say.
Okay, yeah.
But later on, I would say two months ago, that's when we started like looking into like, hey, we need an expert. We need an expert on telling us what we need to do to get our music out. And now we have like a plan, which is like a very solid plan to release our stuff every 2 months. And I'm grateful for that. So that got one of our major problems away. Basically all solved. Hopefully we could keep it up, because I know we also have like creative differences where we kind of just like we're very particular. Well, like some of us are very particular with the smallest things, so that one we can probably resolve just by talking. And that's the thing that I'm grateful for with this band, is because most of them are just basically understanding of like how the whole thing should sound like. And we're basically still very excited about doing new things anyway. It's kind of like not like, hey, I just want to make the song and just leave me alone type of thing. It's mostly like, hey, this sounds so good, so please let's work on it, make sure we give our 100%, and make sure we sound good when we play it live. So I'm just grateful for that. We still have that energy from like years ago, even though we stopped playing during the pandemic. But yeah, I'm just really grateful, man. As of now, we don't have problems, and if we do, it's basically very small things.
Somewhat adjacent to that question, what sort of, I guess, musical influences do each of the band members add? Are you all kind of interested in the same kind of music? Or, um, obviously you're an indie rock band, but um, what kind of influences are there at play?
Um, this is something that I never really people never really discuss when they're with us, because either some of them don't know or some of them already know and just don't want to talk about it. We're a super group. Paper Gliders is a super group, which means we have members who have had other bands or is currently with other bands. Um, so influence wise, there's definitely difference in there. Adrian, our drummer, he's from another local band called Another Run, which is I would say they're kind of indie too, but they're more alternative rock type of a group. Henry is still a rapper. He's is going by another name, Without a Face. He's a local Houston rapper, and he he does release songs still. I've worked with him with some like his music videos, so I know that for a fact. Um, Abby, which is the female member of the band, she's in another band as well who does not pop, folk pop or folk American folk. And they sound really good actually. They I love their stuff. Our bassist Mo, he's in he's an artist. He's like he is his own songwriter. So his band is basically called Mo Lerma, which is his name. And he does release songs every now and then. The only basically members that are not in other bands was me and Juan. It's me and Juan, and that's the cool thing about it, because if you have people from different bands who are also interested in joining your band, um, they could either eat you up or basically just let you lead. And this is not the type of band that does either. You know, we asked for new members and they approached us because they loved our stuff and they want to be part of it. And me and Vaughn, as the founding members, we appreciate them a lot because they bring a lot of they actually bring a lot to the table, and it's usually something that probably something that they weren't able to do with their respective bands. Um, it's mostly something like they want to contribute because they really like doing it. Like for example, Adrian is not a drummer for Another Run. He's a drummer for Paper Gliders, and he's a really good drummer. And it's something that like he's always like I'm always in awe when he creates something with our music. Uh, Mo is a bassist, but he's not a bassist in his band. He's mostly guitar, so we can relate to guitar stuff. But bass, I used to compose a lot with the bass guitar. I get to relay that to him if he wants to like learn something new or something like that. So we're not as good at bass like together. Like we just kind of just like try to help each other out, like how to like get those root notes in. Abby, uh, she's basically a good pianist as well. She sings well because she was trained vocally professionally. She went to school for it. Um, she's when she joined our band, she wasn't as good in the piano as she is now. But that's the creative process. It gives you like a better perspective and like gives you like more insight about how to do certain things. That's when she started picking up more and learning more about the piano, and she started getting really good at it, because she joined us back in 2018. And when we sent her sheet music to one of our songs. That's when she started like looking at it as like, oh, dang, I just need to learn all these notes, and then started learning those notes, and she started getting better at it. And then, it's amazing, So yeah, that's pretty much like the kind of band that we are right now. We're basically from different musical influences, but also like we get to bring our own sound, and there's no tugging and pulling here. Like there's no pushing, there's no pulling or anything like that. We get to work as a unit and bring the best of each member in some of our songs, and most of our songs, I would say. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's super cool to hear how you all like complement each other and like how it's like a melting pot, but you're still contributing towards the same goal. And I think that's so cool how like all the members of your bands are like multi-instrumentalists, like including you
Mhm.
and Vaughn. So I think that's awesome. Um, I'd like to move on now to your, I guess, like non-musical endeavors. So you talked kind of about art and like visual art, and so you recently graduated with the bachelor's in management information systems. So what kind of got you interested in this field of study since you were interested in graphic design in the past?
Mostly on the web development side, which is something that I'm not really still not good at, I would say, but I can do the basics. During my time in college, I've done some graphic design and web design work to certain clients, and that's basically what got me a little bit of money. Besides having like a full-time job or doing music. Um, but yeah, it still has something to do with art, definitely. Um, I just like the aspect of like being like in a business side of it, because I'm also interested in database and also like doing background network security type of stuff. This is something that my parents never pushed uh on me. This is something I like personally. Like I was looking into like more into like what type of work can I get after I graduate. Um, so far, it didn't really turn the way I wanted it to turn out to, because I ended up working at Harris County. I wanted something more, but also I'm still grateful for the current job that I have. But it's mostly because I'm very interested in doing web design, and I get to be creative still, because that also involves like um, what do you call it, user UX and UI, that user interface type of design, and also it involves uh, the artistic like digital type of like animation stuff. So yeah, I'm still into it. It's just in the back of my mind right now, because like I'm doing more of my current job, and also I'm doing more of the paper gliders music stuff, and also my nonprofits. Yeah.
How do you find balance between your day job and your music then? Is there a, a specific time that you guys usually practice and get together?
Usually Sunday evenings, early Sunday evenings, definitely. I work a 9 to 5 job, so whatever happens on weekdays, I either get overworked or I get some rest. Right after work, I either get as much rest as possible, or I get to do uh, a meeting with my nonprofit, or I could do a commission, or if digital art commission, or I could do either like composing, even like if I want to compose my own songs, which I do have a couple. I definitely use time for that. But my priority right now, ever since like getting into like the normal side of things after the pandemic, is basically try to heal myself. I try to be more mindful of how I react to things and how things stress me out. So I'm trying to learn more into like self-regulating, and learning more into like doing what do you call it? Self, what do you keep keep forgetting it. like when you like say, oh, self-care, there you go. Just doing more self-care and try to be more mindful of like how my nervous system reacts, because I do, like I said, I still struggle with anxiety. So that's what I'm doing right now. But yeah, I do have priorities, work, and then music, and then everything else.
You mentioned like nonprofit work, so tell me about your involvement with Filipinx Artists of Houston.
Um, it was back in 2020, and I think I met Alan, this guy named Alan, and he's Filipino American. Uh, and one day he basically asked me to join Filipinx Artists of Houston, which I wasn't aware of, that exists here in Houston, like a collective group of Filipino Americans doing creative work, like painting, music, or anything. I wasn't aware of that. I also met Royal, who's also like a mural artist and a poet, um, a Filipino American. And yeah, so she introduced me actually to that group, and we started, going to like meetings and started planning. So I every now and then I do gallery shows with them, you know, or we do like small projects, hangouts, you know. And there's the cool part about it, like we do a lot of things creative wise, and then we also get to network, because most of these people have jobs too. Like we have day jobs, we have our own businesses. So whoever needs anything, we can reach out to them and say, hey, I need this, I need that, because that's a cool way to like meet people nowadays, just to know like what they can do for you sometimes, or maybe if you just want to hang out with them. So I do have friends from that group who basically just went to my show yesterday at Cactus Music. It's really cool because we get to hang out, we get to like talk, we get to like see how we're doing, how's life. uh yeah. um that's how I got involved. It's basically during the pandemic when like everybody's like inside their houses and people are just like, spending time online and trying to figure out like what to do next.
You mentioned like your interest in visual art, so you do like digital art and painting. So what draws you to this medium specifically? I know you started off, drawing bones and more of like the medical side of things. But what kind of themes and topics do you deal with today in your work?
um I would say, oh, you can share, I can show you that one. um my last project with Filipinx Arts of Houston was basically the last time I had a painting uh done, probably like almost 2 years ago, I would say, or maybe last year. I'm not sure, I forgot. I painted this artwork called Disciplina, which is discipline, and it's about a kid crying and being told by like a hand that's basically like almost out of the frame. um it's about my experiences as a kid, I would say, because I was in an environment when corporal punishment was like the norm in the 90s. So corporal punishment is basically any adult that you encounter as a kid has the right, or I would say audacity, to lay their hands on you whenever you misbehave, right? And I'm guessing that's kind of similar with other Asian cultures too, where you get to grow up in an environment where you have to be scared and you have to be more mindful as a kid to make mistakes, even though you're a kid and you're natural. It's natural to make mistakes as a kid, and you eventually either get hit by something, uh, or they get to like slap you, they get to torture you, and it was the norm. So when I painted that art, my painting disciplina, I was thinking of like my childhood days, because that's basically how I relate to the trauma that I have with my fight or flight response, and that's got me into like my anxiety disorder. Does that make sense? Yeah. So yeah, so like most of the art that I have, it varies because I mean I'm Filipino American, but I also want to be an artist. So if I want to paint something that I kind of like, I just paint it. Or if I want to paint something that like looks like a painting of like my favorite painter, that's something that I kind of want to do too. Like I imitate other artists. Jim Warren, I do Jim Warren, Francis Bacon, Jackson Pollock, certain things. Because I do also like a lot of classical, like Archimboldo. So it really varies. I think as an artist, you have to look into something that gives you more freedom.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Like um this idea of art for, what it is, not attached to anything or any idea, just something that you want to make.
Mhm.
Thanks for sharing that. Um, you're also a part of the Filipino American National Historical Society, the Houston, Texas chapter. So, how'd you join this organization, and what are some activities you do within it?
Um, Actually, it ties with the time I joined Philippine Arts of Houston,
Mhm.
because like I said, people have their own things as well. Join that organization, you get to meet other people outside of the organization, because they are members of both organizations. So that's actually when I met Alan. I remember now. So Alan, that's the guy that I met inside Philippine Arts of Houston, who introduced me to Philippine American National Historical Society. And when I joined their meeting, I was intrigued at the way they explain how things work with the organization, and also like the things that they probably need that I can provide. And so I applied as a webmaster for Philippine American National Historical Society, and I ended up getting that job. And that's basically when I started making content for them, trying to get everything with the website, try to run it, try to do what they need for me to do. I also work with different committees. So this thing where you interview me, I do that with the members as well. So it's pretty much the same thing. I ask them questions, take their video, try to be more creative about it. I go to their places, and basically they can share the life stories, and that's basically what we archive as well. Mhm.
Very awesome, very cool. It's cool that you were able to kind of integrate I guess, your interest in the creative side of like websites and that sort of design into that too. That's awesome. Um, so I'll move on to a few questions about heritage and identity. So, after immigrating to the US, did you still celebrate kind of your Filipino heritage at home, or um, was that kind of lost when you immigrated here?
Um, my family, we're all born in Philippines. We're all diaspora, right? Where we don't have an ounce of American in us just yet. We could be Americans by paper, but it's all different. So if you say like heritage, you're just basically talking about us, because we carry that culture from our home country to here. So if you say like I grew up here and my Filipino-ness is like basically gone, like you just have to come to my house, because it would smell as Filipino as as humanly possible. Like you would smell the dried fish every now and then, or like the adobo or the lumpia. Like you would smell all that coming here, and That's the thing about it. Like, you can't really take Philippines out of a Filipino if you think about it, or a culture out of a person. Whenever you go, like wherever you go, it's something that we celebrate, not because we have to celebrate it. It's because it's our life. You know, we speak Tagalog, we cook Filipino food. Um, we talk about Filipino politics and our stance about it. Um, we talk about relatives and how things are in the Philippines economically. So things about it, like some aspects of it would be like just us trying to keep up with like the current events. And I think that's important when you're trying to like care about your family in the Philippines, because you get to relate to them on how to like you know how things are going there, like how it's affecting them. And at the same time they get to tell you like, hey, like there's this new thing about like the pop culture here in the Philippines, and like listen to this new band, listen to this new artist. Oh, something happening on this show, you have to watch this online, or there's this new movie that you need to watch online, and or if it's on in theaters here in Houston, maybe we could go and watch it. So everything Filipino, definitely it does something we never let go, you know. So been living here for like what, 15 years, 16 years. I still hear about like whoever's the new hot stuff, like the hot actor in the Philippines is, and also like which new songs are, available now, like which new bands like the most famous. So, Filipino man.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what is your perspective on the recent rise in kind of anti-Asian sentiment in the US that kind of got exacerbated because of like the pandemic, and like the xenophobia? And what are some ways you think, as an artist or musician, you can fight back against these sort of attitudes?
Oh, I think it just started. This thing started when probably someone from like the highest position of office started calling it China virus, right? And this happened before. I would say, uh, like more than a decade ago with bird flu, I would say. And then I believe some people tie that to Asia. And remember that I don't want to say it's pandemic, epidemic, I would say, when it came across to like outside Asia, and people start calling it like Asian virus, right? It's pretty much the same thing, right? So people get to create that narrative that a certain group of individuals are more dangerous than they are, um, and that narrative is definitely very very intrusive and definitely very dangerous, because it's the same thing that happened when 9/11 happened. Suddenly all Muslims are bad, right? But you never hear this with people who are not considered people of color. And that's something that basically we need to keep in the conversation, definitely. So I would say, identity wise, if you're an Asian during this time of like anti-Asian hate, it's definitely important to like at least speak about it, right? And we did. um we uh we also spoke about George Floyd, when that thing happened, when people started backing out the injustice of the police, because they said they had the right to do that, and they pretty much don't. So I remember going to that rally in Houston a couple years ago about it, and we started to like telling people to be in solidarity with Asians and uh, African Americans, because we're sharing the same hate at the moment. And Yeah, I've had so many conversations with different people as well. And as long as we have that same goal of like telling people, hey, this is not right, then that definitely helps us, being out there, and we get to keep doing what we're doing, because once we normalize that discrimination about Asians becoming very dangerous because of this, COVID. Uh, Once we let them uh, spread that rhetoric, there's no going back. We're gonna be that type of people getting the same hate as what the Muslims are getting it now, right? With the Arabs, um, like they're gonna put us in place like, oh, like this uh, Arabs are terrorists, and now they're gonna call us, oh, Asians are dangerous. They eat, they would tell us like how we got COVID. They would say like, oh, we eat like other animals that like we shouldn't be eating anyway. So it's really important. Like I said, there are certain things that we definitely need to keep putting in the conversation. And as a musician, we thankfully we never really struggle with it, because they know like I'm someone who's basically like telling people like, hey, we are a band. I'm Asian, I get it. Um, but I'm doing this for the love of rock music, right? It's not something that like I'm telling you like, hey, uh, this 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 band is basically something that I want to create because I want y'all to hear what Asians in rock sound like. And there's already a lot of that. Like Kirk Hammett, for example, he's in Metallica. He's Filipino American. Um, Joe Santiago, he's from Pixies. He's Filipino American. Chad Hugo, who is basically Pharrell Williams' partner from Nerd and the Neptune, who's basically the producer of like most 2000 music, Filipino American. But do we talk about how Filipino American they are? No. We talk about like how they are as artists. Like they just want to create things, right? So the hate, if you're an Asian American and you're getting the hate, it's probably not because of your music. It's basically because it's personal. So I would look more into like communities that like would look at you like as a person, and then telling you, hey, you're dangerous. And you would tell them, no, I'm not. I'm just a person. I'm dealing with the same struggle as you. I'm dealing with COVID too. And it's not because of us, because of that COVID thing. If it was, then you probably would have gotten it right now just by talking to me, right? So I get to do a lot of back and forth like that outside of what I do. And I did experience a little bit of that when COVID started back in 2020. I did have that conversation where someone just discriminated at me, discriminated that I look Asian, and then it's because I probably started COVID. So there's always that dumb conversation that like I have to like deal with, and then tell people like, hey, I'm just a person just like you, and I don't have COVID yet, so that means I didn't start COVID, and please don't hate me. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Mhm.
Before I close the interview, I'd just like to ask, is there anything else you'd like to share that maybe I didn't cover in the interview?
Uh, hmm.
If not, no
Well,
worries.
yeah. I mean, I do want to share a couple of things. Well, maybe one thing.
Sure. Absolutely.
I just want to tell if you're watching this, I just want you to know if you're Filipino or Filipino American, just live your life according to what you want. Um, Whether or not like what your parents think about what you do with your career or with your education. Um, do whatever you want. Of course, you have to appease them with something that they probably can talk to you, and you get to like go into this like small understanding of like what you really want to do. Um, Most of the time, it's gonna be hard. The reason why I pursue music is because, like I said, I'm definitely a rebel. I also enjoy what I do, and that's the most important thing, right? Also, if you find your friends who wants to do the similar things, don't let them go. What I meant by that was, if you want to work with someone who's basically have the same taste, or not even same taste, like different taste, but also have the same drive as you in creating like a small goal, it's definitely easier than just doing things on your own. And your past doesn't really define you as you are now, and I hope you understand that. And you have to create a narrative that suits you the best.
Thanks so much for sharing. And thanks so much again for talking with me today. You shared so many like good perspectives on your own career, your musical endeavors, perspectives on current issues. And so yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you for having me.